Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at primary progressive aphasia, or PPA for short. And this one might hit close to home for a lot of you folks out there, especially those of you taking care of older relatives.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't realize that this is a specific brain condition. It's not about just getting older and losing your memory or something.
Yeah.
This really targets how we communicate.
Right. Not just like general intelligence or anything like that, right?
Exactly.
Wow. Fascinating. And we've actually got some great info today from the Mayo Clinic on this one. Plus, we'll hear from some folks who are dealing with PPA firsthand.
And one of the things that might surprise you is that PPA isn't just like one thing. There are actually different types.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So it's kind of a spectrum?
Yeah, you could say that.
Huh. So I guess we should start with like the basics, right? Like
Right.
what is PPA and how is it different from, say, someone who has, trouble speaking after a stroke or something like that?
Okay, so PPA is actually a type of dementia. But unlike some other dementias that you hear about that affect memory, this one really zeroes in on language.
Uh-huh. I see.
And yeah, it's totally different from the kind of aphasia you might see after someone has a stroke. Like a stroke happens suddenly, right?
Yeah.
But PPA, it happens, it's this slow decline over time.
So when you say dementia, just for those who might not be super familiar with the term, what do we really mean when we say dementia in this context?
So dementia is just a general term, really, for when you have mental abilities declining. And it's severe enough that it's getting in the way of your everyday life.
Yeah, sure.
And with PCA, the mental ability we're talking about is language.
So it's like, you know what you want to say, but you just can't find the words.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that must be incredibly frustrating,
Oh, yeah.
right?
I can only imagine, yeah.
And what's wild is that, in those early stages of PPA, a lot of other mental skills can be totally fine, like memory, reasoning, all that.
So the person's fully aware that they're struggling to communicate.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. It can be really isolating and upsetting.
Yeah, no kidding.
Which is why it's so important to understand this condition, right?
I think
Now, going back to what we were saying about there being different types of PPA, the Mayo Clinic actually breaks it down into three main subtypes.
Okay.
Semantic, logopenic, and agrammatical/non-fluent.
Oh, wow. Those sound complicated.
Yeah, they are a mouthful.
Can you break those down for us a bit?
Sure.
And maybe give us some examples of how they might affect someone day to day.
Okay, so let's start with semantic PPA. Imagine you're looking at, a table, right? A simple everyday object.
Yeah.
And you just can't remember the word for it.
Oh, wow.
Like the concept is there, but the actual word is gone.
That's kind of like when we have something on the tip of our tongue.
Exactly.
That's just like all the time.
Yeah, but way worse, right?
Yeah.
Okay, now logopenic PPA. That's more about having trouble getting the words out when you're speaking. People with this subtype speak haltingly, with lots of pauses, like they're searching for the right word. Imagine trying to tell a story, but you keep getting stuck.
Oh, man. I can see how that would be so frustrating.
Yeah.
Both for the person and for anyone listening to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's the agrammatical non-fluent subtype. This one messes with your ability to make grammatically correct sentences.
Mm.
So you might put words in the wrong order, use the wrong verb tenses, that kind of thing.
So it's not just finding the words, it's putting them together the right way.
Right.
Does this affect writing too?
Yeah. Writing can be just as hard as speaking for folks with this subtype.
Man, it must be so tough.
Yeah. It's like, you feel like you're losing your voice, your ability to express yourself.
Especially when you're still sharp in other ways.
Exactly. It's a really profound thing to go through, and it makes you realize how important it is to be patient and understanding. There's a lot more to a person than how well they can communicate.
100%. And I think that's a perfect point to shift into thinking about the bigger picture of how PPA affects people's lives. It's not just about the language itself. It's about relationships, emotions, and just, your whole quality of life.
You're right. Let's talk about those things next and see what kinds of resources and support are out there. One of the hardest things about PPA is how isolating it can be. It's like you're losing your voice, your connection to the people you love.
That you're trapped, almost. You have all these thoughts and feelings, but you just can't get them out.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to create a supportive environment, a place where communication, however it happens, is valued.
So how can we do that, practically speaking?
Yeah.
As family, friends, caregivers, what can we do to bridge that communication gap?
Well, first off, patience. Lots and lots of patience. People with PPA, They need time to express themselves. They might struggle to find the words. So don't jump in and finish their sentences for them. Don't try to speak for them.
Just give them the space, right? The time they need.
Exactly. And, keep things simple. Use clear language. Avoid jargon, those long, complicated sentences.
Right.
Sometimes visual cues can help too, like pictures or gestures.
It's almost like you're going back to basics with communication, right?
Yeah, you could say that. It's not just about the words anymore. It's about those nonverbal cues, creating a shared understanding.
And that reminds me of the DROTH acronym we talked about from the Mayo Clinic. They talk about how important social connections are for brain health, even with PPA.
That's a great point. Staying connected is so important for everyone's well-being, but especially for people with PPA. Even if conversations are harder, we have to encourage and support those interactions.
So even if it's not like a deep conversation, just spending time with loved ones, doing activities together, even if they have to be adapted.
Exactly. And remember, social connection doesn't have to mean just talking, right? It's about shared experiences, feeling close to people, feeling like you belong.
What about support groups? I imagine those can be really helpful too.
Oh, absolutely. Support groups are fantastic because they give people with PPA and their families a chance to connect with others who get it, who understand what they're going through.
A sense of community.
Yeah, exactly. They can share experiences, learn coping strategies, find resources, and early intervention, therapy, that can make a big difference too.
So there's actual therapy for PPA.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Speech-language pathologists can work with people with PPA to help them improve their communication skills, to cope with those language difficulties.
Oh, that's great.
And they can help families too, give them tips on how to communicate better.
So it's not just about treating the individual, it's about giving the whole support system the tools they need.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that PPA is progressive, right? So it's going to change over time. That means that the support and the care plans have to change too.
You have to be flexible, adaptable.
Exactly. Everyone's experience is going to be different. And I imagine as PPA progresses, planning for the future becomes even more important.
Absolutely.
As things progress, people might need more help with daily tasks, making decisions, and eventually, they might need full-time care. It's essential to have those conversations early while the person can still participate in making those decisions.
It's about respecting their autonomy.
Exactly. And making sure their wishes are honored.
These are tough conversations to have.
They are, but talking about them openly and honestly with compassion can really help down the road.
What else should families be thinking about? It's like you said, having that roadmap. Things might change along the way, but at least you have some sense of where you're going.
Exactly. And a big part of that planning should involve, the legal and financial stuff like power of attorney, advance directives, all that.
Well, the person can still be involved in those decisions.
Yeah, right. And, even with all the challenges and the practical stuff, it's important to remember that life with PPA is still life,
Yeah.
It's not the end. It's just, a different chapter.
Mm-hmm.
One that needs resilience and flexibility and focusing on what you can do.
That's a great way to look at it. Finding new ways to connect, to express yourself, to find joy.
Yeah.
Even when communication is hard. And that actually reminds me, we talked about those personal stories earlier. I'd love to hear more about them. Like, what can we learn from other people who've gone through this?
There's one story that really stuck with me about this woman who was an amazing musician, And as her PPA got worse, she couldn't speak as well, but she could still express herself through music.
Wow, so music became her new language in a way.
Yeah, exactly. It was like she could bypass those barriers and connect with people on a deeper level.
It's amazing how the brain can adapt like that, right? When one thing stops working, another part steps up.
Yeah, it's incredible. It shows just how resilient and creative we humans can be, finding new ways to express ourselves, even when we're facing these huge challenges. And it reminds us that PPA doesn't erase who you are. It doesn't take away your passions. It just changes how you express them.
Were there any other stories that you found particularly powerful?
Yeah, there was this man who was a writer. And as his writing got harder, he started painting.
So PPA actually kind of opened a new door for him.
Yeah. I love that way of looking at it. It's about embracing change, finding new ways to be fulfilled, even when you've lost something.
These stories are so inspiring. They remind you that even with PPA, there's still beauty and possibility.
Right. And I think that's a really important message for everyone, whether you're dealing with PPA personally or not. It's about seeing the humanity in everyone, regardless of how well they can communicate.
Absolutely. Creating a world where everyone feels seen and heard, no matter how they express themselves. Well, as we wrap up this deep dive into primary progressive aphasia, what's one last thought you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I just encourage everyone to be more mindful about communication, be patient, be compassionate, and let's create a world where people with communication challenges feel empowered to express themselves, a world where their voices are truly heard.
That's a beautiful thought. And for those of you who want to learn more about PPA or find support resources, we've got some helpful links in the show notes. Remember, even when faced with tough diagnoses, human connection and a positive outlook can make all the difference. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration.